All right, tonight we're cranking out some welding. Got the swing arm completely all fabbed up. Showed a pretty good look when I built this thing, but it's just the original carrier. And then the dual shock mounts here, which drop the shocks as low as possible to try and get the rake accounted for. And then I have bushings that pop in here that are obviously out while I weld it. So that should work good. We have one thing actually completed. I also went ahead and drilled and inserted these crem nuts for the body mounts. And you'll see here I have my hood pins taken care of. So you'll see that all when I pop the body back on. But for now, I'm going to continue to weld out all of the rear portion of the frame here. It's the gas tank mount and the shock tower, weld all that out. I think this will probably get braced, and I was planning on doing a step notch back here still, so I think the brace will probably kick into the step notch. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of all that now. All right, well, it's taken several hours. This thing actually has a ton of welding on it. So we've hit every joint on the thing, which is taken, oh, missed the spot. Got it all welded up, and we pulled the swing arm and got that all buzzed together. So this thing's ready for probably the last time I'll assemble it prior to pulling it all apart one more time to paint it. But we need to assemble everything, and then we need to start in on the stuff like the dashboard so we can mount our gauges, lights, wiring, switches, and final things like brakes, throttle control, all sorts of things. But I'm happy to say the frame is all done. All right, I get the body set back on the frame, and I have made a semi-major decision that I am going to widen this thing. Really want to be able to fit 2 people in it. Still will primarily be a single-person cart, so I'm not going to make it huge, but I'm going to go ahead and add 6 inches to it. I'm going to do that by cutting plates out, so 3 inches here, 3 inches there, and then same down there. Up here, we'll change this angle so the cowl will stay the same, which means the sides will come out, but everything else will stay exactly the same. I think that'll also help with covering up the tires, obviously, preventing so much mud from blasting forward. And in the end, it might make it look better. I don't know. It might look 10 times worse. We'll see. But this is kind of the last chance I have to make this change, and I don't want to regret not doing it in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and start cutting out all the plates to widen this thing. I also have to widen it back here, which is going to be a treat, but we'll see how it goes. All right, it's taken about 6 hours worth of work, but you can now see we have a 3-inch section over here, a 3-inch section added over here. Also had to go ahead and add some more triangles in here to account for the angle that the body is now. And made this filler piece because there was a divot there and I need a straight line for the hood to butt up against. So I'm sure once we get it all set on there, we're going to do some trimming. We'll have to trim that area straight again so we can scoot the tub back to where it needs to be. But man, a lot of work to add only 6 inches of width, but I think it'll be worth it in the end to be able to ride around 2 people at once. So I'm going to go ahead and get this thing flipped over and we'll get it test fit. All right, well, we have a little bit of a problem. So the body's sitting where it's supposed to be in the original body mount holes, which can change. Overall, I think it looked cooler when it was skinnier. It looks, I don't know, a little weird being that wide, but definitely enough room for 2 people. And I mean, this back panel looks huge because there's nothing on it, but we will have tail lights, reverse lights, maybe a spare tire carrier or a jerry can holder. So that'll break up how huge that is back there. And then when we come around the front here, you'll see that back fender still doesn't stick out any more than this fender, which is how a real flat fender is. So that's good. So from the front, I mean, it does look wider, but it doesn't look bad at all. The real problem is, since I changed that angle, I now have a giant gap up here. So I guess I just reduced the amount of, well, it makes sense. Turn the angle in, so I reduced how far forward it goes. And obviously we have the hood set and we have the body mounts already done, so I really don't want to have to move anything. So I'm either going to have to build little filler panels, which isn't ideal, but isn't the end of the world. I can scoot the body forward some, but right now we're centered on the tires, and I want to leave it that way. Definitely don't want to bring the hood back already, because it already looks a little goofy on the side. So I think our best bet is going to be filler panels. So yeah, I guess that's what we're going to have to do. One skill I'm very happy to have is being able to cut relatively straight lines with a cutoff wheel. Super helpful. So we got that trim now, so let's get the body set up there and see if it clears the steering column. If not, I might need to knock off part of that or cut a little divot for it. Well, that makes it a lot better, but we still gonna have to take a little chunk out here. I don't want to remove this plate because it's holding that pillow block nicely. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, we got our hood extension in. Pretty good fit up on the top. This side needs some work, but I've got a piece of angle iron supporting the body in there, so I can't really work on that. And then, if I could step over my scrap pile here, got this side fit up about as good as it's gonna get. So we have added a ton of welding joints to this. Now I gotta weld all the way around the hood back there. I gotta weld in that filler piece, more weld in here, and then of course a ton of welding joints all back here where I added to the body. But it should all hopefully be worth it. So now the last thing we had to do for the body extension is go ahead and throw a floor back in it now. So let's go ahead and work on that. All right, we're back to exactly the same spot we were 24 hours ago, except for now we have 6 inches more of width. So I don't know if you could tell, but there's definitely room for 2 normal sized people in there. We got our floor in now. I opted to keep the original centerpiece and just add to it. That way, I don't know, getting kind of short on some 14 gauge and want to make sure I have enough to do this panel, firewall, dashboard, all that stuff. So reuse and go from there. The front end still needs a little bit of tweaking, of course, but it's pretty close to lining up. So overall, I'll give you guys the best views I can of it so you can see how it looks. I think the video doesn't make it look much wider than it already was, but it definitely is because it's almost to the same width of this fender now. And it makes it look a little funky. I'm not sold on how it looks, but I think it'll be well worth it to be able to fit 2 people in here. It'll be a lot more fun. So I don't know what I'm going to work on next, but you guys will see it in a second. All right, so what you just saw getting cut there is our new dash. So we've got an old amp meter out of a Cub Cadet tractor, a nice key switch, and then we'll have room for 5 switches, which would be taillights, headlights, hub locks, and have 2 extras I'm sure I'll use up eventually. So I think the plan is, I could very easily just weld this into the tub. That'd be really easy and probably would look really good. But then every time I want to pull the tub off, I would have to unhook all the electronics, which isn't the end of the world, but it would be kind of a hassle. And I want this tub to be able to be on and off pretty easily. I don't know, maybe I'm too worried about that. Really, once I'm done this thing, I shouldn't need to pull it unless I'm doing major changes or whatever. I can reach in here to get to the chain and all that. The belt is all underneath. So I don't know. So I need to decide whether I just weld that into the tub or if I build a bracket off of our tubing there and stick the dash in there, and the dash won't actually be attached to the body. So when you pull the body away, the dashboard would still be attached basically. Haven't really decided which way I'm going to go yet, but I guess we'll just kind of do some thinking and see what we want to do. So got the dashboard mounting figured out. We cut these 1-inch strips with 1/4-inch holes in them all the way around, and that's going to give us a great spot to go ahead and drill all the holes into that dash. And that'll hold it on there, make it easy to remove. So whenever I need to pull this body off, won't be as sweet as if I made it attached to the frame so you could run the Jeep. Well, it'll stay with the frame, but it won't be sitting there. It'll be kind of flopping around or whatever. This should work perfectly fine though. And doing it this way allows me to take care of some of the rough edges here on the dashboard and kind of just tie that whole thing together. If I would have made the dashboard mount to the frame, it never would have matched up right with the body. There would have been gaps. So I think this is the best of both worlds. So I'm going to go ahead and get this tacked on here. And I got a little piece for the other side. And then we'll go ahead and drill out the dashboard and get it all mounted up there and hopefully have that done tonight. Man, I am pumped on how that dashboard looks. Haven't drilled the holes yet, but just got it clamped up there. Obviously, we'll have a whole bank of switches over here. But I debated pretty heavily on using this amp gauge because useful, but not super necessary, but that looks awesome. Also pretty cool because that amp gauge came out of the tractor that gave up its hood and fenders for this, so it's kind of ironic that we did get to use one more piece off that tractor. Same with the clutch pedal, actually, too, now that I think about it. All right, got all my holes that I could reach marked out. And I've always wanted to try out one of these center punches that you don't have to use a hammer for, so I picked this one up at Harbor Freight the other day, so we'll see how it does. It does work, but it really doesn't have a lot of power. You guys probably can't really tell, but it just barely puts a little one in there. So I'll probably have to go back with a hammer and finish it off so I really have something to start with for drilling. All right, got the dash all bolted up there. Missing a few bolts, but it's going to come in and out of there probably 5 more times. But I'm really pumped with how that looks. So that's great to have that done. I've been thinking about how I want to do that for a while now. The next thing I need to do is when I widen the body, I was able to scavenge the old rear body mount holes, but I need to re-drill front ones. Alrighty, got our 2 body mount holes drilled. So our body is officially back bolted to the frame. Got our hood aligned as well as possible and ended up doing some funky work to get that done. And I'll show you guys the next time I have the hood in the tub back on here. But I have everything pulled off because I am actually officially bolting some stuff in for hopefully the last time other than when I pull this all back apart to paint it. But we got fresh bolts for the shock mounts. Got my bolts in for the swing arm. Got the swing arm all greased up and assembled properly. And really just trying to start button things up so hopefully I can drive this thing soon and not be scared to death when I go to do it. So one of the big things I was worried about getting done was the throttle setup. So as you know, I'm going to use a gas pedal for this, which usually is a pretty simple thing to hook up. But the guy I got this motor from had already built a janky throttle setup and kind of mess with a lot of stuff. So the original throttle linkage on this thing is all pieces and parts are missing. Things are not where they're supposed to be. He had just hooked a cable on up here, which I could do, but I really want this thing to be not janky. But at the same time, I don't think this engine's going to last us very long. It seems like it was already a smoker when I ran it the last time. Maybe it'll last a while, so I'm not quite sure how far we're going to take this throttle setup if we're just going to change motors in the near future. But I am going to go ahead and pop this air filter off and just kind of take a look at everything and decide what I want to do here. And yeah, so let's do that. So I don't know if I'll use this air filter setup in the end. They sell nice little pod filters that would save a lot of under hood space. Probably end up going that direction if this is the motor I'm going to keep. Also would really like to convert over to a slide style carburetor. They sell adapters for these Briggs motors. That would be pretty nice. All right, so we got the air filter popped off here, and I've got my starting design for my throttle plate. So I decided to go mounting off the 2 shroud bolts here and this bottom bolt through this piece of scrap up here. We are going to trim it way off, but the main idea here will be to go ahead and use this throttle clamp, I guess you could call it, to hold my throttle cable, which is this guy, firmly there, and then we'll hook on right to this governor linkage, and that'll be our throttle. The choke will be separate on these motors. They're kind of funky. Originally, full throttle would be full choke, and that's your only way to set your choke. I don't like that, so I'll just end up running a choke cable, putting another throttle clamp right there, and we'll hook that up. So I'm going to go ahead and get this all trimmed down, make it look a little bit better, and drill our hole to install our clamp. All right, got our throttle set up, finished up for now. Got our throttle cable nut holder thing drilled and put in. We've got a cable nut on here. Not a huge fan of these things, but they're definitely a necessary evil. Then we went to the original hole in the governor shaft. I think hooking onto the governor like this, we should be safe and still using the actual governor. Actually, no, this will be bypassing the governor now that I think about it, but that's how it was set up before since someone hacked this throttle setup already. But basically, we just pull in the end of the cable here and our throttle works. I do need to move that way just to get more throw, but I know it all works. And then what we will do with the gas pedal here, which is what this is this little hook eye will sit right on there, and we will have a fully working throttle setup. So that's awesome. All right, so one of the last big projects we have on this project before I can start assembling it fabrication wise is I want to go ahead and run some crossbars from here to here. You can see here on both sides we have original stubs where the frame of the four-wheeler would have gone in some sort of arc. So all I'm going to do is just run them to this, which should be perfectly fine. And I need to make them removable. So I think the plan is we'll drill a hole here, we'll put a stub on here, drill a hole there, and then I have a piece of one size bigger tubing than this, which will cut out the bottom and then be able to kind of just drop it on there, pin it in and go. That way we can make that removable, but this top is still supported because right now it's only really held together down there, which is pretty good and probably fine, but I want this thing to be strong and I don't want to snap the front end off by accident. So let's go ahead and get started by cutting out some pieces. All right, we got our, I don't know what we'll call these bars, but crossbars put in here. Yeah, it would have been a lot stronger if I welded something in there, but I wanted these removable just so it makes getting the motor in and out easier. They should work fine. Like you guys saw, I cut the bottoms out, drilled them, pinned them. They're not the easiest things to get in and out, but they shouldn't have to come out any more times than I have to pull the motor out, really. And it might not even need to come out then, so that should work good. Also went ahead and welded in our hood pins here, so those should work good. stick up through the hood. Wing nuts. I ordered these giant wing nuts on Amazon, and they work pretty nicely. Gives me a lot of adjustment, and I can tighten it down rather than just like hairpins or something like that. And then I feel like the hood would rattle around. And I do have a good way of attaching the fenders back to the body, but that'll be once we get the body on. All right, time for some reassembly. We're gonna start with the engine. I can fit it in here like this. So that means these doesn't need to necessarily be removable, but I'm glad they are for in the future. All right, next we need to throw the tub on, which I've gotten pretty good at, but it's still kind of heavy. I gotta kind of thread the needle under the There we go. Now you can play the game of aligning it. Voila. And while we're at it, we'll throw the front end on so I can kind of level everything out together. And now I can finally show you what I did to make the hood alignment work well. So I knew with this hood being removable, it was gonna be very tough to get a proper lineup every time. So I cut out this plate that slightly overlaps the body, which I mean, not great looking, but it's fine. Up top, we got the same thing going on. So basically the front end sits on top of the body, so there's no gaps. That makes the hood alignment a lot easier. So I'm gonna spend some time leveling everything out and getting all our bolts in the body. And then we need to throw the trans in. All right, now time to install the trans, which is by far the easiest component to install. Done. Well, except for bolts and pulleys and stuff like that, but you can't see that anyway, so. Well, I was installing the pulleys and belts and was wondering why my arm felt wet. Seems like we have quite a bit of oil coming out of the exhaust, which I'm going to chalk up to the fact that I've had the motor on a couple different angles while it's been sitting out of it, but not a great sign. So, and it makes a mess of my floor. Alrighty, it's the next day. Decided to wait until daylight to try and drive this thing. I didn't do anything to fix the exhaust, dumping oil. I assume the carburetor float sunk, dumped a bunch of water or fuel down in the crankcase. So I'm gonna go ahead and change that out, but yeah, we're pretty much ready to drive this thing. Sorry, I did wake up with a cold today, so if I sound a little different, that's why. Go ahead and swap the oil out real quick and see if we can drive this thing out of the garage for the first time. but also the transmission seems a little funky. I don't know what's going on. That belt's too tight now. Gotta find like the happy medium, I guess. All right, we're gonna try going downhill to start. I think with the locked axle trying to turn tight and the belt slipping, it's not happy. So we'll try this to start. All right, I feel like trash, but I'm much happier knowing we did get to drive this thing a little tiny bit. Now, I was having big issues with the belt system, definitely needs some work, and the chain system seems like I can get it super tight while I have it just sitting here, but as soon as I sit in it, obviously it makes the chain go a lot looser. So I need to either figure out a very heavy-duty, robust tensioner system or something there. The belt system, I'm not quite sure what I need to do there. It's either seems like it wants to stay engaged all the time, or it doesn't want to engage at all. It slips. So really kind of annoying. So those are the two big things I need to fix now. I also have the equipment, the brake lines and stuff in the mail now to make the brakes function, which would be very nice to have before I really start driving this thing. And then a whole myriad of other things. So we'll go ahead and get started on figuring out our issues. All right, it's been a week now. You can still probably tell I'm a little bit sick, but I'm feeling pretty good. Really, the only thing I've gotten done so far this week is tear the body off of it and order this idler sprocket, which is just a 40 series sprocket with a bearing in the center. And this is what we're going to use to build our chain tensioner. So I got you set up so you can see why we need a tensioner, and specifically why it needs to be spring loaded. So right now there's no weight on the chassis, and you can see this thing is super tight, way too tight actually. But as soon as I start putting some weight on it, it gets super, super loose. So we need to design some sort of spring-loaded tensioner so that when there's no weight on it, the tensioner's not doing anything. But then when I put weight on it, it's pulling tight. So we have a couple different ways to do this. Nothing's really pulling out to me right now. I don't know how I want to do it yet. So I'm going to do some thinking, and I'll show you guys what I come up with. Alrighty, whipped up this tensioner real quick out of some scrap. So we got a little plate mounted down to the transmission plate down there as our pivot point, and then a 5-inch long piece of flat stock with 2 holes drilled in it and the idler on the end. And then this spring runs up to our shock mount. So it keeps it pretty tight. I think we're going to need a heavier spring, and I think we'll end up needing to make that pivot longer. So here you can see why I think we need a little bit longer, is because it wants to go up and almost hit the transmission, which is probably fine, but longer means more leverage and everything, right? So keeps it decently tight, but I think a heavier spring would do us even better. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a longer lever real quick, and then maybe we'll go test this thing out. All right, went ahead and made a 2-inch longer piece. So now we have much more throw, which is good. I also went ahead and increase the length of our clutch arm. So we have more adjustment there and we get a better, tighter belt when it's engaged. So hopefully these two fixes solved our two big issues with driving this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and slap the body back on and we'll give it another test drive. Okay, so far our design changes seem to be working. The clutch is much better now. It still wants to hang up with the clutch pedal all the way in, so it makes pulling the shifter into gear aggressive. So the belt still spins a little bit, but it will actually clutch and not allow the vehicle to move with the clutch in. The tensioner back here, though, I had to make one big change, and that was originally I was pulling up on the top of the chain, but now I have it changed so I'm pulling on the bottom of the chain, which works much better because that's the part of the chain that actually drives it going forward. So you want that to be tight. The top can be somewhat loose, but the bottom's the more important side. So that raised an issue of the head of the bolt down there was rubbing on the swing arm. So I actually modified that bolt and welded a washer in for the head instead. It gives us just enough clearance. Still not perfect. We'll have to do some changing to that in the future, but for now that works. Alrighty, here's where we're going to cut it off for this episode. I would say this is probably the biggest update yet with being able to drive this little thing finally, but it is a long way from finished. We have a ton of things to finish up. We have to do the brakes, the four-wheel drive setup, and then have to tackle the giant beast of body work and finish welding this thing out. So thank you guys for watching, and definitely keep an eye out for the next update.